And why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on in Oregon these days? You guys are in a push and pull system. I often point to the Oregon system as one of the best in terms of registering patients. You guys have got 1/10 the population of Canada. You've got about literally 10,000 more patients than we do in Canada. But on the other hand, you have no dispensaries that are federally authorized right now. So what's going on?
Well, nobody has any dispensaries that are federally authorized.
Well, that are state authorized. Sorry,
Right, except in Canada, right? I want to follow up a little on what Jeff said on a couple of aspects. One is the motivation for the kinds of things that we're doing in Oregon and California and Washington on repealing the law, for me in Oregon, comes from a speech that Dick Evans gave at the Normal Conference in Portland, where he explained that the way that alcohol prohibition ended was that the states refused to enforce the federal law, the federal Volstead Act. They made it that it wasn't a state crime. And what Jeff was talking about, the legal word for it is commandeering. The federal government can't commandeer the states and require that the states make it a crime to for anything. And so I represent 4 medical marijuana patients in Oregon, 3 from Washington County, west of Portland, and 1 from Jackson County near Medford, near California, all of whom went to get concealed handgun license, and the sheriff said, "We can't do that. It's a federal crime for you to possess a firearm. You know, I can't, I'd be helping out, in a federal crime." And we're like, well, no, all that a concealed handgun license does is it makes it so you can't be prosecuted under state law for carrying unlawful possession of a weapon by carrying it concealed. And we won in the trial court, and we won in the Court of Appeals, and we won in the Oregon Supreme Court. And both the sheriffs have filed petitions for certiorari, and we're hoping that the United States Supreme Court won't take it. But if we have to, we'll go to D.C. and we'll win there too, because this is a fundamental precept of federalism. It's fundamentally what federalism is about the states being free to come up with their own practices for protecting the health and welfare of the states, and for the federal government not being able to commandeer state law by requiring state criminalization. So I'm a fan of Sensible Oregon, of the Sensible Oregon approach, which is the same thing as more or less as Sensible Washington, Sensible California. Repeal the prohibition for adults against cultivation and possession, and require an agency, in Oregon, the health authority, to regulate. That's our proposal. There's a constitutional amendment. I have issues with it around it being a constitutional amendment. And there's this ACTA, this tax and regulate thing. I have issues with that. But in Oregon, we don't talk like we do in Washington about how don't sign this initiative. We talk about how, kind of like what Roger was saying, everything moves things forward. In Oregon, the 3 initiatives that are going on, when we were on Russ Belville's internet radio normal hour show, we all agreed that we would sign each other's initiative, and if any of the 3 got on the ballot, we would vote for it. Progress is progress, and I agree that it's poor drafting to include a prohibition on, or any kind of a per se rule about the nanograms of active THC equals driving under the influence. I agree that that's problematic. I agree it's problematic about this other thing. But brothers and sisters, in our family there are just too few of us, for us to be shitting on each other. It's important that we do. Sorry for sounding like Douglas for a second there. It's important. It's important that we do what we can to move forward collaboratively, cooperatively, and in peace and love. So
I agree.
And to the extent that Oregon is doing anything as a model, that's one thing we try to model. In Oregon, we lost the dispensary initiative. And those of us who were working on the dispensary initiative said during the campaign, if the initiative passes, we'll have licensed and regulated dispensaries. And if it fails, we'll have unlicensed and unregulated dispensaries. So we have unlicensed and unregulated dispensaries in Oregon. The way that it works is that it's kind of like what Bill was talking about. It's a collective model. The idea is that in Oregon, there's a gray area in Oregon law about whether a patient can only reimburse their grower for the cost of supplies and utilities, or whether a patient can reimburse any grower. because in the absence of a supply system, the way it works is that patients are supposed to freely exchange their excess. But if my grower has excess and another patient doesn't have a grower, can reimburse that grower. That's basically how the dispensaries are set up. The U.S. Attorney sent out a letter, saber rattling, scaring everybody. Some of the landlords responded unfavorably. One landlord in Ashland wrote a letter about what a terrific job the dispensary is doing, how they invited in the Ashland police to come check it out, and so it's moving forward. We're doing what we can to organize around that. Other projects include we're trying to add PTSD to the list of debilitating medical condition. We've reached out to veterans groups about that because we don't have that. And the other thing I wanted to mention was about Philippe said. I lost a case in the Court of Appeals, a California patient who was coming through, who I argued that he had a right to travel with his medicine and that Oregon has to give full faith and credit to California law. Court of Appeals disagreed but said, there isn't anything really in the law that requires you to live in Oregon to register as a patient there. So you can, if you have a listed debilitating condition, which are most of the physical conditions that cannabis helps, register as an Oregon patient, and as long as you have less than 24 ounces, you're protected from the law. That may change next session, but it is currently the law and the procedure now. And I also understood we were going to talk about, and I agree that the best way to do it is to repeal it. The best thing that could possibly happen to patients is to repeal the prohibition on these cannabis.
So everyone
laws.
go down and register in Oregon. I think that's a good idea. If there will be reciprocity offered by other states, you can start in Oregon. I want to point out our cannabis fairy in the back. If she comes up here, I'm going to give her a little bit of money to keep this fine event going, and I hope that others will pitch in a little bit. And I also want to thank the Saddle for letting us use this amazing venue once again, because I got to tell you guys, this event cannot take place in every city in North America. See, it's worth it, for the love of God. You're doing a good thing, and you get a little love. So thank you so much. Please make sure that you give a little bit, give a lot, to keep this movement going.